You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia. All right, so today we have Tahnee in again.
Take two.
Take two. I do apologise because I had hyped everyone up with our Tahnee interview, and then when I went back over the recording, we actually had a different mic set up, so the recording was terrible and it would have hurt people's ears, and I'm still hell bent on trying to fix it. We might have to pay someone externally.
A professional,
yeah, because
well,
we're doing
a professional, but a different type of professional.
Someone who really knows their audio. Yeah, because it's, we're doing all the editing ourselves at the moment, and my skill set isn't there yet, but it is full of incredible content. So I do hope that we can fix that and get it out there. And I'd love to just build on that in this episode, but just in case, we'll do like a little touch through.
There'll be a bit of overlap.
A little bit of overlap. But I guess today we really wanted to focus on your pregnancies, births and postpartum experiences. We actually put a little shout out to on our socials, and we had a couple of questions come in, but a big one was navigating your relationship postpartum too. So if we can add that into the mix. Yeah, because I guess for all of us, it's pretty stressful times. You're getting used to a completely different flow and way of life. So it's always nice to know how everyone navigates that.
How do we do that? I'm not sure.
But yeah, so
That's so nice.
I guess let's begin with your pregnancy. We'll start with Aya. I think we can go briefly because you have spoken about Aya's pregnancy and birth quite a bit. So if you can give us a little overview of that, and then we can go nice and deep into Leo's.
A little nugget. Yeah. Okay. Well, Aya, so my husband and I were not married at that time. We were living separately, and I was living in Newcastle. I had a yoga business down there and was very attached to the idea of not letting it go. And he wanted to move to Byron, and I was very anti-Byron because I was like, oh, so many yoga teachers and it's such a cliche to move to Byron Bay, blah. And I'd grown up in the tropics, so I don't know, I was like, oh, I don't want to go back to being sweaty and hot and all of those things. But in my heart, there was this pull to the tropics. So it was kind of this funny little tension. And anyway, we were up here on a retreat that we'd facilitated, and we'd just finished the retreat, and we were making love. And on the retreat, I'd had this vision of a bird flying down and landing in my womb, and it had a physical effect. It felt like something had hit me. And I remember saying to him, like, I don't think I'm pregnant, but I just feel like I got pregnant, but I was lying in the sun, there was no actual way to get pregnant unless something really weird was going on.
You marry.
Yeah, I'm married. That's
the end of the story.
And that's
Goodbye.
The podcast. No, I'm not married. We did have real actual sex. But yeah, so that was sort of, and he was like, oh, it's funny you say that. I've been feeling this energy, and we'd both spoken about wanting kids together, but I had planned to do a 2-year. So a 1 year of preconception cleansing, and then a 1 year of build up, restoring my body from all the breaking down of the tissues that cleansing entails. And this particular retreat we were facilitating was like a fasting retreat. It was quite intense. And so I was not I'd been holding a lot, doing a lot of body work on people, a lot of energy work. And so I remember thinking God, I don't want to be pregnant right now. I don't feel like we're in the place. I don't even live with you. It's all very complicated. Let's not get pregnant right now. Anyway, we got pregnant. And I remember we were lying there afterwards. I was like, I think we might have got pregnant. And we both felt it, and we both kind of talked about it, and we both bypassed it. And I left and I went back, and I was driving back to Newcastle just feeling, so it's about a 9-hour drive. And I just was I feel so strange and out of it, and got to my friend's house and slept for a whole day. And, I kept kind of making excuses for why. I think I even did a liver flush because I was like, maybe my liver's not very clean. Anyway, and then I went and taught another retreat and I was like teaching with a friend and my boobs were growing like every day. And she was like, you're obviously pregnant. I was like, no, I'm not. La, la, la. Anyway, so about 5 weeks later, I go back to Mason and in Byron and I'm like, look, I'm pretty sure I'm pregnant. Let's pee on a stick, as you do. And yeah, so I was. I actually peed on a stick in the burger shop in Byron, which is so unromantic. And we both, once it was positive, we were like, had to walk out of there and we went to the beach. And we
you did? You had to walk out once you saw a positive test for your first pregnancy.
In a burger shop. Oh my God. I still remember it. I was like, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, get out quick. So we left. We weren't even like going to buy a burger. We were so healthy at that stage. We wouldn't have eaten a burger. But anyway, it was just one of those. There was a toilet basically is why I was there. Yeah, so all of that said, that was just the most magical experience. I felt like her and I had this, I don't know if it's like a karmic thing or like, but she was so present for me through my entire pregnancy. I felt her presence. I knew she was a girl, like she was coming to me in meditation all the time. I knew her name, so that's where her name came from. I saw it while I was meditating written across my vision, like when you use a sparkler and you close your eyes and you can still see the light, like it was like that. And we always saw her as like a bird or a sort of flying horse, sort of an air creature. So her middle name is Pegasus, which we laughed when we were filling out the form because we're like, we're going to get the Byron Bay pile. I get the birth certificate place. And it took ages to get a birth certificate back. And I'm like, oh my God, we're in the like hippie parent pile.
Are we allowed to let them name their child
Pegasus?
We need to have discussions.
And they're like, we don't know how to pronounce that first name. It's like AIYA. And we're like, oh. Anyway, they gave it to us. Yeah. So, and I just felt really, so I had moved. The minute I knew I was pregnant, I just kind of dropped everything. I sort of left my business in the hands of a manager. I moved up. I took a month off just to rest because I was like, I know I'm so depleted. Like, I was strong and like young. I was 30, I think, when I got pregnant and really fit. I'd been practicing yoga and, my whole life. But I was aware that I'd been doing a lot of cleansing. So I was like, I just want to really spend some time eating lots of food and like lying down and resting and getting sunshine so I had the privilege of doing that. We lived on this amazing permaculture farm. It was like 200 acres. I'd hike to the top of the spring any day that I felt like I could do that. I didn't really get morning sickness, but I got nausea some mornings, which I felt like when I ate dry crunchy toast and salt, like it was amazing. So I pretty much lived on dry crunchy sourdough in the morning. And yeah, just kind of had this great time. And Mace had gone off to do a plant medicine 10-day thing and left me for 2 weeks basically to myself. So that was a really special time. And I think I just remember like going outside at night and crying. There was just stars and I was like, my baby's going to see the stars for the first time and like having these really beautiful moments. So for me, it was a very connected and beautiful pregnancy. Yeah, and so we kind of just focused on getting our stuff together. Like we had to move house eventually to find a place we could birth. I wanted to free birth her, but I didn't feel, I look back and I feel very much like that person needed to validate herself to everyone else. So I didn't, even though I had the most connection and trust and like faith in the whole process, I was like, oh, I'm going to get a midwife because that's like the right thing to do. And I'm going to, and I can even look back at some of my posts and it's almost like virtue signaling. I'm like, look, the midwife dropped off a kit full of drugs and stuff. Like, look how good we are. Like, we're not just having a baby on our own at home. Like, we have a midwife. And I'm like, my God.
We might choose a weird name, but we're doing it right.
We're doing it right. And, and I think for me, like, and I've been sitting this so much since Leo was born. So that's like 15 months ago. I'm like, oh my God, I like care so much about, presenting the safe, right choices and like doing the proper thing. And even though like I don't care about that stuff and and at no point did I feel connected to the system we were in, but I could almost feel how I kept like gaslighting myself and like I'm like, oh, it's not that bad. Like I remember sitting down with the midwife the very first time. We ended up using the Byron midwife program. And she's like, oh, you had an eating disorder when you were young. Like maybe you can't have a home birth. And I'm like, what? Like I was 20 and I'm 30 and I've spent like 10 years in therapy and doing all of this stuff and like working on myself, and I'm so strong and I'm so like, I know who I am now. Like, why would you even bring that into the equation? And I kind of said that to her, and she was really good about, she made a note and was like, okay, cool, we won't like hold that against you. But I remember thinking, like, why are we even talking about this? Like, you know, they do this full sort of psych thing of you and your history and everything. And, you know, and my dad's always like, it's the lowest common denominator, and I get that. But yeah, for me, I just felt like the whole time I was bumping up against a system I didn't care about or agree with. And I like the idea of having like a government supported midwife program in theory, but in practice, it's just exactly the same as going to the hospital, I think. They're managed by the same, if anything, actually maybe a little bit worse, because they are so afraid of losing their system that they don't want any risk. They don't want any like variation outside of a really narrow range, which I didn't understand at the time. It's taken me a while to really understand that.
But you can see where like just to give the midwives a little bit of a little bit of rope.
Midwives are amazing.
Yeah,
the system is not amazing.
The system's not amazing, and they're held and they're tied to it, and their licenses are tied to that. And I mean, we've all seen in the media what happens for a midwife who steps out of that.
Yeah, they pretty much
advocate for
lose their jobs and get treated like criminals.
Exactly, and it's
awful.
It is so awful. So you can see where that fear is coming from. It's a very real reality, and for anyone practicing, you know, to support in its entirety their client or their pregnant lady. God, where are my words? Why am I stumbling on that?
You don't know the English word for it. You've been in Italy for a while.
That's right.
Mama.
Madre. So, you know, and so I just wanted to put that out there because I know there's a lot of midwives.
Yeah, I want to be clear that my midwives were great people,
absolutely.
As in I didn't have a problem with them per se. I just felt like the system I kept having to navigate, and, you know, my midwife was especially amazing. She was like, I know you don't want to do this, but I just have to offer it to you. Just say no. I'm like, okay, no. Like, that's how we would get through it. But the fact that she even couldn't just be like.
And also, like, I think a lot of people forget that we play a role in fucking up that system, because there are people out there who, if the midwife didn't do something that they think was important and something tragic happens,
lawyers up.
Look who lawyers up. It's always us, and it's always us who wants to be, you know, we're passing the responsibility and all of the things back onto them, and like, that's not cool. And unfortunately, they're only doing that because they're covering their asses from people who actually go out there suing midwives and professionals, because tragedies do happen too. Like,
yeah, I think
God, we could go deep onto that. Hey, like, oof.
Well, having had a free birth now, and I know I'm jumping, but that what I can see is I allowed, you know, like, I don't want to villainize midwifery and the system in the sense that, like, I want to critique it, but I don't want to make it the enemy, and I want to acknowledge my lack of sovereignty in that as well. Like, I was very much like people pleasing, and I didn't want to rock the boat with, you know, holding a strong boundary, like, especially when my midwife went away, she went to Italy. I had a different midwife, and I found her really challenging to like navigate, and she was very strong and very in disagreement with my choices and didn't like respect me like my other midwife did. And with her, I ended up conceding to doing the glucose test because she was like, just do something. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that one, because I thought it was like the least bad, you know? And so it's like that I can see my role in like not being able to stand up to her and say, no, I don't have to. Like, I'm educated about this and I am informed. And I was like, so it's more my work and my kind of, like my acknowledgement of where I was at as a person at that stage. But I do also think it's tricky. Like, I watch, you know, I even was listening to one of your podcasts the other day, and I just got so angry that it was the one where you were the birth photographer twice. And and like, not, you know, it wasn't sort of at anyone. It was just, I'm just angry that women have to go through that. Like, it just pisses me off. And you know, it's such a special, sacred thing, and we have so much fear, and there's so much like projected on you, and it's just not really fair, you know? And I know
and it doesn't just come from the systems.
No.
It comes from like the entire community, from your parents, from your friends, from the person who has that one story where, you know, the baby died, and so now you have to write off all of A, B, and C. But, you know, and then you hear about the stories of babies dying in hospital, but that, you know, they did their best, so it's okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty weird double standard.
There's a double standard there, but it's so indoctrinated into society to diss one thing and then promote the other as being safe and responsible. And anyway, I could go on.
Well,
and
it's
on
kind
and
of
on.
like what Chloe just said, though. Like, you know, we all get off on the war stories too, though. Like, I remember growing up, and this has been a big thing I've been unpicking in the last sort of 12 months as well. Growing up, listening to my mum, sitting around with tea and coffee, talking about birth. And it was always like, I'm a heroic bitch who like birthed and it was hard and I did it. Or like, I'm a victim of something. Or, you know, like it was very much this energy of war and battle and like, you know, defeating it. And I'm like, like that's a very internalized thing that I carry and I hold. And I don't know if that's like most productive thing to bring to birth. And, you know, and again, this is just my story and my kind of, I guess I'm constantly like examining. I see birth as like this fundamental like opportunity to transform. It's like one of those big initiations that we can really use to like evolve our consciousness if we use it that way. And so I use my births all the time. I'm like, what did I learn from that? And what am I unpicking out of that? And especially I've spent the last year with Jane Hardwick Collins, who I think you guys have had or are having on.
Yeah, we've got to get back in touch with her.
She's a very busy human.
Yeah, but she was keen, so we're still to set a date.
She's amazing. Yeah, but one of her big teachings is we use our births as in us being born into the world, and then the births we have to help like look at ourselves from this bird's eye view as the map of our lives and our evolution and like what lessons we need to learn and where we're avoiding responsibility and where we can, you know, and like I've just learned so much from, you know, I kind of started doing it after Aya on my own, and then I've learned so much from being around Jane and kind of going deeper into that process. So yeah, so by all accounts, like we only had one scan with Aya at 20 weeks. My husband and I agreed to that. Again, when I was doing it, it felt completely wrong, but it was cool as well because I'm a bit of a nerd and I was like, wow, like all the anatomy and all that stuff. So, you know, it's a payoff, I suppose. Baby was perfect the whole way through. There was never any concerns. And I feel like I remember my midwife said to me, that was just a textbook birth, you know. And I remember thinking like, I don't want a textbook birth. Like I want like my beautiful, like, you know, it was psychedelic for me and it was incredibly intimate with my husband. And it was, I remember feeling like I was every woman who'd ever birthed and every human that had ever been through a woman, which is everyone, you know, and I just had this like incredible time. But I just, that energy of like, you know, the monitoring and the being watched and I don't know. And I have unpacked this birth a lot. We have a podcast episode about it, but you know, I knew when I went into labor. I just remember sitting there with my husband. I'm like, oh, I'm in labor, you know, like it was just different. And he's like, how do you know? And I'm like, I just know. And I remember like, I'm like, okay, now you need to call the midwives. And he was like, how do you know? And I'm like, I do. And I came and they were like, no, you're not ready. And I was like, I am. And they were like, no. And they left. And then I'm like, no, you need to call them again. My husband called them again. They came back. You know, it's just stuff like that where I'm like, I knew. And then, you know, they're like, oh, you are having the baby. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you won't have it till tonight. And I'm like, no, I'm going to have it soon. And it's just this process of like constantly having to be like, no, I know what's happening. I'm doing it. I'm having the baby. You know, and I was a first time mom and whatever. So I guess there's a lot of stuff that goes on there. Even I said, I don't want any exams. My midwife was like, we want to examine your cervix. I was like, oh. She was like, look, just, you know, it helped, you know, I was like, okay, yep. You know, and again, people pleasing, like I should have just said no. So get out of the tub and they examined me. I think she did a sweep while she's there. The most pain I've ever felt in my life after she touched me. Straight back in the tub. No one's touching me. Leave me alone. I'm staying here. You know, so it's good because those things helped me to set my boundaries. But like the fact that they had to happen, you know, sometimes I'm like, ugh. And then the worst thing was Aya emerged. She was perfect. My husband caught her. We pulled her up. She was breathing but quiet. She was just looking straight into our eyes. He was behind me. I was holding her, like looking at her, and she was just staring into my eyes. And the student midwife who'd we'd agreed to have there leant over and like blew into her face. And, you know, for me, that's such a violation of her right to transition and her, the intimacy we were having as a family.
And also your breath is the most important thing on that baby's face.
But also like she doesn't need to cry. She's fine. Like she's obviously fine. Mm-hmm. She's just obviously fine.
Like, that's such a primal move.
Yeah. And I just, I get it because I get it. Like I get it on that level. And then I'm also like, no, that's not okay. And for us, that was actually the biggest decision, like the biggest reason we pre-birthed. It had nothing to do with all the other stuff. We were like that intimacy and that like, that moment of like her transitioning into being here, like, whoa, what a sacred space for her. So yeah, we were like, you know what? That was a big red flag for us that we just don't want to do that again. Anyway, she breastfed straight away. I had my placenta straight away. Like everything was literally like bang, bang, bang. I was at the beach at 6 p.m. watching the sunset. She was born at 2. Then we went to bed. She slept all night. I slept next to her being like, wow, I have a baby, and that was it. We were just like, oh, and my midwife never came back because I was like, this is so instinctual to me. Like I don't really feel like I need. The only thing that I was confused about was I put clothes on her in summer and she went all red. I was like, was I not supposed to do that? I always see babies wearing clothes and the midwife's like, take the clothes off. I was like, I called her. She's like, take the clothes off. So that was the only thing I didn't really clock. I was like, and then she was just nude for like the rest of her life, basically.
To this
trying
day.
to get children to wear clothes in this area. Like it's winter, you need to wear a jumper. But yeah, I just felt like she was my initiation into trusting birth. And then like I had my son and everything was different. I had no spiritual connection to him at all. I was like, hello, are you even in there? Like, is there a baby in there? Like I was growing, but like, yeah, I just had no feelings, none of that sort of deep like awe and connection that I had with her. I was really angry during my first trimester. Like with her, I just felt like so blissed out and everything was amazing. And with him, I was like, I hate you to my husband. Like, I hate everything. I hated having to cook dinner at night. I was like, I hate all of it. I was like, wow, like who am I? I felt like just
Can I just quickly ask? So you had Aya. What's your gap?
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, actually, I was going to ask like what you did to rebuild because I know you did.
Oh yeah.
But maybe we can just go through that briefly at the end. I don't want to.
Yeah, no, we can go back. So I think that's good to talk about because we wanted to talk about postpartum, so I can talk about that. Aya, for me, was, I don't know, again, I just felt really like it was very easeful. I had her, she like latched, I don't know, that was kind of, I didn't have a shower until the next day. I don't think we just kind of, I might have had like a rinse actually to wash the blood off and stuff. But then, yeah, like I just remember we just didn't wash her. We were just so connected with her. We slept with her, my husband and I he was just obsessed with her. Like we were both just obsessed with her. It was sort of summer, like she was born December 4. So we had this whole, like we ended up being able to take time off work and we just had this whole time. But we did lots of like people who don't know what it's like to have tiny baby things, like went to a Christmas party and like being like, why are we at a Christmas party or a little baby? But it's kind of easy when they're that little too. I didn't really do the 40 days as I thought I would. Like I was really planning to do the 40 days with her, but summer is such a tricky time for me to stay indoors. I was getting a lot of FOMO and like feeling more anxious about staying indoors.
I can totally resonate with that. All my babies were born in summer and every single time I planned on doing like confinement, and I was just not okay with it. I think by like 10 to 14 days, I was feeling so depressed. I was like, this is just, I'm forcing it now. I actually don't want to do this anymore. I need to get out. Like,
the energy of the season is yang, right? Like, so you do actually have a lot more energy available to you. And look, I always rest a lot. So my sort of strategy was we would go out in the early hours of the morning or the night, like so dusk and dawn, go for a walk on the beach, like do something like that. And then we would go back and sort of rest through the hot part of the day. And then I would, like usually go out again in the arvo. So we sort of didn't do like heaps of social stuff in the middle of the day. But I just felt like for me, and we lived right on the beach. So I was like, I don't know, it's 40 degrees outside. Like sitting inside just feels crazy like at dawn when it's beautiful and there's like, just such a magical time to be out. So yeah, so we kind of, I did definitely like I cut out a lot of cold things, although I do remember having like a beer after she was born. So it's like I hadn't had alcohol the whole time. I really wanted a beer. And I had like a smoothie with my placenta and a few things that were sort of probably not very like TCME. But I encapsulated the placenta and ate that. We did eat some raw as well, like in a smoothie, not raw. That's a bit hectic. Never quite got there. But yeah, I felt like I just really focused on, like for me, having my background in yoga, I started out like thinking you kind of needed to kill yourself to be healthy. And then I worked out like, no, it's actually a lot to do with your nervous system and rest and like, learning how to regulate your body and like what. So I just kind of kept checking in with myself. I would have acupuncture. At that time we were actually really broke. So I couldn't afford a lot of like body work or care. I think I had like one massage and a couple of acupuncture sessions, but that was a really big deal for us to afford because we were growing our business and everything was in the business. Like I think we were making like $400 each a week, which was basically food because we eat organic food. So it's like,
how did you afford food on that?
Well, there's only two of us. Hey. Yeah, the baby just ate boob. But like our rent, I'd paid in advance, so we didn't have rent, which was good. But yeah, like we were like living on nothing at the time. So we just, we kind of just like Mace would help like massage me. I would do yoga, I'd do breath work, I'd rest a lot, I'd eat as well as I could. And then, I started really like focusing on, things like liver and meats and things that I'd been vegetarian for 14 years. So it's sort of like hadn't really explored that world. So, kind of more that nourishing traditions vibe. I started eating dairy again. Like I started just really bringing in, I just kept looking back at all the old school stuff of like, if a kid's sick, you take them to the farm and you give them cream and, eggs and like, it's like, you don't rebuild like health with like carrots, salad and juice. And it's just not really what you do. So I was really conscious of that. And my background, I'm obviously white and tall, so sort of Scandi. And I'm like, we probably would have been eating dairy and a lot of these things. So I started to just be a bit more practical about like, I think having lots of juices and lots of things that primarily were a big part of my diet before, a lot of vegetarian meals, Ayurvedic meals, they weren't really serving my body that I could feel. So which was a big change for me. Like I remember eating a rabbit and being like, whoa, like I'm eating a rabbit. But it was like cooked in this stew and it was really delicious and like a friend made it for us. I was like, wow. So just a lot of that sort of thing. And I really spent a few years as the time went on and we've obviously our herbs as well played a big part in that. I took a lot of deer antler, which prior to that I hadn't really taken before, and that's really like rebuilding, and they use it a lot actually for children that have like sort of genetic issues and stuff to help rebuild their jing. It's used for pregnant women in China as well. So I really focused on what we would call jing in Chinese medicine, so rebuilding that essence, and then my blood as well, because I tend to be blood deficient, and especially after birth, because you do lose blood, and especially when you make a girl baby. So a girl baby requires more of your blood because they literally have a uterus and all of these things that you're building, which you don't build when you build a boy baby. So that's common. A lot of, I don't know if you guys have noticed that with your girls, but a lot of women can be more iron depleted or blood depleted post birthing girl babies than boy babies. But girls and boys are like the same these days. So that was a joke.
I'm so glad you joked about it. That's interesting though, because my 3 first babies were girls, and like I naturally just like bled a lot and felt much more depleted after them. But then with my 4th being a boy, there was like no real loss, and I feel like I was much quicker to kind of
come back.
Like I had more in the tank and more energy and more, I could kind of do more.
I have noticed that too. So having had a boy and a girl, like my daughter, it was also like the energetic imprint of her. Like I would meditate after I had her, and we had this like golden cord attached to us. And this was like quite late on that it was still happening, probably like around, just trying to think, because we moved around 8 or 9 months. I think, around there I was still feeling this really strong like energetic connection to her. Like she literally lived outside of my body but was energetically in my field. And I remember practicing next to her, and I'd sort of like, she'd be taking in what I was practicing, and I was like, wow, this is really strange. And I remember going to see my teacher when she was like 1.5 or 2. No, she was 18 months, yeah. And like still having this really open like womb space to her and I don't know, like I still don't fully know what's going on there in terms of, but I didn't have that same thing with my son and it could be also all that other stuff that I had with her. But I found it really hard to find to re-establish my boundary, my sense of myself with her. Like there was a lot more openness. And I think that makes sense too when you think of like in Chinese medicine, the spleen is the mother and also the creator of boundaries. And I think when we have children, naturally we obviously we want to keep them in our field and that is always the case. But yeah, I think if you're creating a girl child, there might be more of that sort of energetic sharing between the mother and child. And that makes sense when you think of the red thread and all this other stuff. But that's just a hypothesis. I don't know if that's true. But yeah.
I might go, that was an awesome little summation and actually so many gems in there, which were beautiful. But let's go into Leo.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we chose to have a big gap, which I chose because I was so busy with work and I felt like I really wanted to give myself a year to do the rebuilding and when I could sort of afford to give it the time and energy it deserved. And I felt like the first couple of years after Aya was born, we were trying to buy a house. So we were really focused on just getting, as much business momentum going as we could so that we could make that purchase before, because we'd sort of watched the prices here like doubling over the couple of years we'd lived here and we were like, okay, we really want to get in before it gets out of control. So we managed to pull that off, which we're really grateful for. And then once we sort of had the house, I think my nervous system and my sort of mind were able to be like, okay, now we can focus on something else. So I started seeing an acupuncturist every fortnight and I worked with him for about 2 years. And that was such a profound experience for me because he ended up starting to mentor me as well. I was thinking about studying acupuncture at the time and and I remember just getting so much value out of working with him and I felt like the best I'd felt. I was, he was really strict on me eating, a lot of meat and a lot of things that were, again, not normal for me, but I really made a big effort, took a lot of herbs, and then was having body work and then yoga and practicing and stuff. So just really feeling like I was trying to nourish myself, minerals, all of those kinds of things. And then I remember we were like, let's have another baby. We're like, okay. I think we made love 2 days later. My husband got a call that his dad was dying. He got on a plane and I was like, oh my God, I think I'm pregnant. And this was all in the middle of COVID. So it was all happening. So he got to Sydney. I got to Pilates. I was like, I don't have a core. Or I just felt so strange in my belly. So I was like, I think I'm pregnant. I'm going to got a stick and peed on it. And I was. And Mace was down in Sydney. So I was like, oh, hey, I don't know when you're coming back. So I'm just going to tell you on the phone. And he was so excited and we were so excited. But we kind of had to deal with Mace's dad passing away and he ended up dying. So it was a few weeks Mace was down there and so that was really big. And by the time I was 10 weeks, it was his funeral and I was on a plane. We were heading down in the middle of COVID. So we weren't even technically supposed to travel, but we got an exemption because of the funeral and stuff. And we kind of ended up down there. And I think, I'm not sure if it was Paul passing and all of that sort of stuff that went with it and Mace being away. But I just don't remember feeling amazing and having, gone through Aya's pregnancy where I felt so good. And I'm I went into that really depleted, but I felt so amazing. Whereas when I went into Leo's really resourced, but I actually had the opposite experience. I was super, but I also think, because we'd decided to free birth, I think I needed to process a lot of emotion and I was rageful. It was the first time since I was a teenager. The only other time it's come up was when I got my period. The very first kind of couple of times I would get this intense rage. I just hated everything and everyone and would scream at my parents. And I was like that with Mace. And I remember him being like, I've been with you for a while now, 8 years or 7 years, and you've never been like this and I don't know what's happening. And he was so good about it. He was just really patient with me. And, he'd walk away and I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm pushing a boundary here, but it was all directed at him and I really hated him. And I literally remember looking at my Aura ring that I was wearing at the time. And I would get so hot, like my temperature was really high. And I'm like, oh, it's this whole thing. And again, in Chinese medicine, you're like kind of baking a loaf of bread when you make a baby. Like you want heat and steam, and like those are the conditions, like an oven for creating a healthy baby. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's a good thing. And maybe it was because it was a boy and there was like different hormones in my body, like who knows. But yeah, so at literally week 14, it stopped. Thank God. And I remember being like, oh, I'm okay now. Sorry. It's just like, Jesus Christ, what did we just go through? And we kind of had to unpack that over a few weeks. Just be like, do you really hate me? I'm like, no, I do not hate you. It's just the hormones.
And you hate, like, no one is allowed to say that except for the person experiencing it. Like, if anyone was
because
like,
I don't even really believe that. But I'm like, it was my experience. I'm not sure how else to explain it. And look, I think it could have been so many things. Like COVID was making me mad, and like there was so many things going on in the world that like rage was probably a pretty appropriate response, like to be fair. But yeah, it was really interesting. And then the pregnancy was just like pretty tricky. Not the pregnancy was kind of fine, but like all of the stuff around it. Like I was trying to get out of Super Feast, our business. I'd been working there, like running the company, and so it was this massive process to like leave because, you know, my hands were in every pie. We were just building this like really expensive new website that it was a massive project that had taken over a year, which, you know, there was just so many things going on that I had a deadline on now because I was pregnant. I did not want to be going back in there with a baby on my boob like I'd done with Aya. So we were kind of really, I felt quite stressed and quite like busy, and I didn't feel like I had a lot of space to be in connection with the baby, which may be another reason I didn't have as much of a sense of him. But he was a mystery to me the whole time. And I do remember feeling like it might have been a boy, just because it was such a different experience. It was like sort of the only logical explanation. I had dreams of twins like at least 2, maybe 3 times. And they were amazing dreams where I would just literally birth them like seamlessly and quickly into my hands, and then I'd be standing there holding these 2 babies, and I was like, whoa, like that's not ideal. And we weren't having scans, so we chose to free birth, and that wasn't even a conversation really. I feel like we just both were like, well, that's what we're doing if we ever have another kid, you know, obviously. And Mace was a little bit more I think feeling the responsibility of like if something were to happen, like he would be the one that would sort of be dealing with maybe paramedics or a hospital. So he wanted to be sure that he could advocate in a way that he felt was aligned with what we were kind of wanting. And, you know, I felt really prepared and educated myself, but I was like, oh yeah, he probably, like he doesn't read as much as I do, and he probably doesn't follow as many, you know, Insta accounts as I do, and whatever. So we chose to do a course, which was Jonia Radical Birth School or something like that. I'm not actually sure. It just literally kind of popped up, and it was like in 2 weeks, and so I bought it. And it was like a 5-week course that sort of went through, you know, planning to have a baby, I guess like being pregnant, the birth, and then postpartum, and then maybe like a question and answer week or something. So we kind of, the first 2, to be really honest, we didn't get much value out of, and it was sort of about, you know, making sure you have raspberry leaf tea and all this kind of stuff, and we didn't feel very much.
I feel like you guys are quite well read in that
like,
area.
We got that bit.
You could probably teach that part.
Yeah, but like the birth part was helpful. She's a nurse, and I think for Mace, like what I really took from, like again for me, I was like I do know a lot of this stuff, but for him and doing it with him, it was really great to see where he would get hooked on something or be like, oh, is that a thing that could happen? Or, you know, it's like, okay, there's like a little bit of fear there or something that he might need to unpack. Or, and so in watching all of that, we talked about everything that she sort of presented as like complications or things that you might want to be aware of. And he and I both agreed the only thing we felt would be like something we would consider transferring for would be a prolapsed cord. And there was some great images of what that looked like and how, you know, the sort of Mace would know if I wasn't. And me passing out was the other concern because I'm quite big. So I was like, you know, I'm 6'1", and like and I think pregnant, I don't know how much I weighed, but I would have weighed a fair bit. So I'm like just making sure he felt comfortable that he could like maneuver me, maybe wet in a tub or like whatever. So those were the sort of things we really focused on discussing and having a plan for. And then we kind of were like, okay, well, we know those things. Let's just go. And so he later told me he did go to his therapist one time and talk about fear and not wanting to put it on me. So he was like, I need to talk to you about it.
Good boy.
Yeah, which I didn't
Well
even
done.
know.
Yeah.
And it honestly wouldn't have picked up like from him. He was so confident the whole time. But he said to me, like, I trusted your body so much. It was more like my fear around like if I could, you know, like hold it if something happened.
Yeah, I think, can we sit on that just for a second? Because it is really important, anyone who's pregnant listening to this and feeling this is the route they want to take, it's really important for the people around you to know that their fears will influence you. Anyone in your circle, if their fears will influence
especially
you.
in birth.
Yeah, especially in birth, but even in pregnancy, like all of those fears, like it is a lot of work as a woman who is pregnant to not take on other people's concerns because you're already in that really open and vulnerable state. So for like, I just want to like, Mace, well done.
No, well, he's pretty good. Like he gets it. Yeah.
But it's a good lesson for everyone to take away, just to like make sure, and you don't have to come at it like I'm holding this boundary and no one can talk to me about any of this stuff, but just make people really aware that if you're sharing with them what your plans are, that they're aware that any of their concerns are actually not your concerns, and you as the mother have probably looked into all of this in a very deep way, either during your pregnancy, before, and you've come to the conclusion that you're taking the safest route for you and your family. And so anyone in your circle or realm can take those fears to someone else and process that yourself.
Well, that's the thing. I think using the mum as a punching bag or to offload your like, you know,
it's not appropriate.
It's not okay. And it's extremely frustrating to witness like friends going through that. And I'm sort of like, I just want to call this person and be like, shut up. But, you know, I also think like as the birthing mother, you know, that's the piece that I really had to sit in. We decided to free birth. I did not have a single negative comment because of my energy and my just like responsibility in that. And I can see a really distinct difference between the home birth where I was almost making an apology for that choice and trying to validate and sort of, you know, like PR for home birth. Yeah, it's like, it's really safe. Actually, the statistics are great. And like, oh my God, yeah, it's like so much, you know, it's really good for the baby. And it's like, doesn't freaking matter. Like, I'm going to do this. And that was my experience. Like we probably told a handful of people who, like we told everyone, my parents, I said, we're doing what we did last time. So that was just a little tweak. I do remember my dad being like, so will there be a midwife there? And I was like, probably just Mason. And he was like, okay, you know, but we never used the word free birth or anything with them. But pretty much everyone else who was out in our direct sphere knew exactly what we were planning. You know, my neighbors were going to have my kids. Like my street was so stoked. Like they were like, that was the best that we have a baby on the street and you just did it and you and Mason. And like literally all the neighbors still, every time I walk Leah out, they're like, oh my God, there's that baby. It's like, okay, the street celebrity. But yeah, like that we were so upfront. And just, I felt like we just were so like calm about it. We were like, yeah, this is what we're doing. And they were like, oh. But I do think a second kid too, like people knew I'd had a home birth the first time. So there's lots of factors and it's a fun.
Sorry guys, there's a motorbike parading out the studio.
It's a very loud one. Yeah, I really, yeah, it's really tricky. But I think, yeah, it's nobody else's, like, to be able to be Teflon when people put their stuff on you is such a skill and an art.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I would really recommend, like looking at how you can cultivate some of that energy. And then when it's people that you trust and they are close to you, like partners, I think that's when it gets trickier. And I'm not sure, Mason and I had quite a few chats about, so the woman who taught the course that we did, she was like, if your husband doesn't agree, you just lock him out and you do what you have to do. And we were like, oh, that doesn't feel great. Like I get in a sense what she's saying, that like, you know, yeah, it's like it is at the end of the day the decision of the person giving birth, but it's like, I don't know, there's a co-creative element to it to me that I'm just like, if Mace had been really against it, you know, we would have gone to therapy. I think I would have had to just like really unpack that, and I probably would have won in the end. But no, but I don't know. I don't know what it would be like to navigate that. And yeah, if you're doing that, like I have a lot of compassion and empathy for that process, because it must be really challenging.
I would probably put a suggestion of education. So, and come at it really curious, like from a curious point of view, because we had that. I mean, I was throwing that out left, right and centre with all the pregnancies because I don't like hospital, and we ended up having Willow in a hospital, but mainly because I didn't know anyone who had done anything differently. But, you know, I would say over and over, God, I just hope I get in the bath and this baby pops out. Like, you know, babies pop out in the car, babies pop out, blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, when it came to Humphrey, who was an unassisted birth at home, you know, Toga was not okay with it. He was really like, no, that, you know, they did things at the hospital, which, you know, I don't know if I can do those things. I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know. And then we saw, like we actually did a hypnobirthing course, and in it was 4 different videos of women who were relaxed, mainly in water. One was on her, like all fours on the bed. And these babies popped out without anyone assisting, without anyone touching them, without, like, I think none of them screamed, which I don't think is super realistic, but it was very, like, it was very peaceful, and the babies come out.
Yeah.
And once he saw that, as soon as he saw that, actually, he was like, if it happened at home, I'd be fine. So yeah, just a little tip for anyone.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the same reason we did the course, because it helped Mace with his fears. And I think, yeah, you're right with that masculine sense of like, if they have the knowledge and the, you know, I can feel that energy of like, if they feel empowered and sort of strong. And
I think they just want to feel pragmatic, and if they don't know, they can't really.
Yeah.
And at the core of it usually is like, they just love you and the baby and want you guys to be safe. Like, it's not like they're trying to be a jerk and like, you know, stop you from having your sovereign birth or whatever. Like, that's the thing I've always seen in the men I've spoken to. You know, they've always been like, I'm open, sort of. I just don't think it's like, I don't know, like my whole life I've been told you have babies in hospital. You know, now my partner's telling me that's not the case, you know. So, and that's, I've seen some friends like really change. Like, that's something I'm really proud of, I guess, in just in living in my experience. Like, I had friends come and stay like 2 days after Leo was born, and the guy was like, why is your belly so big? You just had the baby. And I'm like, oh, it stays big after pregnancy, for like after birth for a little bit, like, you know, it goes down pretty quickly. But he was like, I didn't know that. And I was like, no. And he's like, and you just had the baby there? And I'm like, yep. And he was like, and the birth pool was still set up and everything. And they were like, oh, you know, and it was just this sort of thing that to sort of drop in from someone who'd only really known
Birth in the movies.
And like his, you know, kind of friends peripherally, like having kind of extreme hospital births and stuff. It's like, yeah, and just for me to be walking around and be really normal. And I think it was like, oh, I remember just watching his face. He was like, you know, and I think that's where we've lost that sort of community aspect of, you know, the street, someone having a baby next door, and, you know, you hear the woman birthing and the kids see the mum coming out the next day holding a baby, and like that to me is just so educational, because you're normalizing what is a very normal process, you know. So yeah, and that's having, like, my neighbors brought their little 8-year-old son to Leo's birth, like in the early stages, and, you know, just stuff like that where I'm like, now, even though he was like, whoa, but I'm like, that's good. Like he, you know, he's had that little imprint of like, yeah, that you just have a baby. It's not that big of a deal, you know.
And so how was the birth?
It was amazing. I mean, it was intense. So we kind of, I think both my kids, I had a heap of Braxton Hicks. So Leo's birth had a few false starts where I was like, maybe he's coming. And we had the floods. So I was 36 or 37. I actually never, I knew when we conceived, but I never tracked. So everything's it was about 36, 37 weeks when the floods happened. And that was the first time I remember feeling really like unsafe, not so much about birthing, but that Mace was going out helping people and he'd be gone all day and we didn't have a phone and we had no power and stuff. And we didn't have power for like a week. And I remember thinking like, oh, I just don't want him to not be here. And I don't think I was ready to do that, face it on my own if I was to go into birth. Yeah, I think now I would, but yeah. Anyway, and I remember being a little bit anxious that he was away a lot. And I kind of went and tried to volunteer a couple of times, and I just felt very overwhelmed very quickly with like what was happening. And that was hard for me because, again, I'm someone who would normally be out there helping, and I just felt very like weak and not capable. So I kind of went through a little bit of a like funk for a couple of weeks around the floods, and then thought, well, you know what, all I can do is really focus on, you know, myself and this baby, and that's what I'm here to do, and this is my time. Like, it's not really my time to go out and serve. So I really just like turned my awareness in and spent the last few weeks kind of in that, and it was actually really lovely. I felt very connected to, like, again, no sense of like who the baby was, but just like to my body, and and did a lot of resting and a lot of just like banking sleep to try and prepare for having a little baby around. And then I thought I went into labor one night, and then nothing happened. And then I was like, remember last time you just knew, and that, you know, I was in my head a little bit. I think I was like, oh, that's a contraction. And I was like, no, that's not what it felt like last time. There was a feeling that you were in labor, you know? And so the day I was supposed to, there was a whole bunch of stuff happened with Superfeast too. Like, someone quit the day Leo was due in inverted commas, but like when we thought he might come. And then Mace had to go into work for this really hectic kind of meeting and like, deal with a lot of issues that were going on at the business. And we also had a cleaner coming at 8 a.m. And I woke up at like 3 that morning, and I was like, I'm having the baby. And I was like, this is not a great time. This is not happening right now. I feel like I just fully shut it down. I was like, no. So I went and got in the bath with my daughter about 5 a.m. and we had a bath for like an hour maybe. And then my husband came and he's like, oh, the cleaner's going to come. And I was like, cool, I'm just going to stay in my room. Don't let them come in here. But like, I'm not having the baby until the house is spotless and you're back from that meeting. And he's like, I'll be back as soon as I can. I was like, okay. So I went to bed and I like lay in there and I was like hiding from the cleaner because I didn't really want to chat. And then Mace came home. I think I must have fallen asleep because he got home around midday and I was napping, and I got up about 4. And I remember walking to the kitchen and I was like this big pregnant lady, and I just got this massive bowl of orange juice, which I don't normally drink, but I've been loving orange juice lately. Smashed this like a whole liter of it. And I was like, right, let's go set up the birth room. We're having a baby. And he was like, okay. So we went and we set up the altar and everything and lit all the candles and started filling up the pool. And I just remember going into that, like, you know, when you're just off your rocks, he was like, whoa, and nothing made any sense. And I don't know, Mace organised for Aya to go have dinner with the neighbours and stuff, but I was very like out of it. And then for some reason I picked up Spiritual Midwifery because it was like sitting on our bookcase, like kind of that way looking at me, and it said you should eat something, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. So I went and made a piece of toast. I like tried to eat it. It was really hard to eat. I was like, but anyway, I was like, gotta eat something. It's labor, it could be all night, you know. And I was like, anyway, so this is maybe 5:36 or something, and then I remember laying down with Mace. So my neighbor had my daughter, and we were just like making out and kind of hanging out. But with Aya, I'd felt very like sexual in that time, like really like aroused and turned on. And like this time I was like not like into Mace or anything, but just like so out of it. Like I just felt like I was on another planet, like, and I couldn't even imagine like how any of that would work, you know? So we just kind of smooched for a bit, I think, and I must have just been sort of drifting around. And then I remember wanting to get in the warm water to have like a bath, and my neighbour's also my best friend, which is great. So she came over with my daughter and she gave me like a back massage and just kind of sat with me for like an hour, and her son and my daughter were playing, and it was really nice. It just felt really like normal and kind of communal and really sweet. And then they were like, okay, we're going to go to bed. And, you know, I'd sort of suggested if I might want her there, but I hadn't felt that I did. So she was going to come in the morning if I was still in labour. And Mace went and put Aya to bed, and he's like, I might go and have like a couple of hours of sleep because you're just hanging out. And I was just kind of like drifting around listening. I'd made this like really spiritual birth playlist and I hated it. I just put on like some 70s bangers and was like dancing around and singing and like get rid of all that woo-woo stuff. So he like was laughing and he's like, I'll just leave you to it for a bit. I was like, yeah. And I was like, I got my journal. I was like, bring me my journal. So I was like journaling, which I haven't actually read, but I'm sure it's pretty funny. And then I was like, I'm going to time my contractions, which I couldn't work out my phone. You know, when you're really out of it. I was like, oh, you know, like trying to make the buttons work. And then I was trying to time it and I couldn't understand. I was like, I don't think this is making any sense, which is a good thing I was so out of it because Leo was posterior and I actually don't think the contractions were making any sense, but I thought it was me. So like not being able to hit the buttons and make the time work and stuff. So anyway, so that was probably the bit that I remember I was so confused. I'm like, am I having this baby? Like, am I, you know, but I was like, well, I'm so out of it. I must be. And then those 4 hours, I don't even remember what else happened, but I remember thinking at one point, I really want Mason and I can't reach my phone, which was like there, like it was like, I don't know, 30 centimeters away from me. It's like, I can't reach my phone. I don't know how to get him. And he just walked in and I was like, oh, thank God. And he's like, I just woke up and thought you might need me. And I was like, yeah, I do. And I was like, I think I'm going to have the baby. I was like, okay. And then we basically, I reckon from about midnight, well, that's what he said. It was sort of active labor and I was starting to feel like really strong surges and really kind of out of it. But the thing that was really confusing to me was it didn't feel like with Aya, it felt like this sense of the baby moving through my body in a really like natural sort of easy way. Whereas this felt like something banging against my pelvis sometimes and then nothing for ages. And I remember going to the toilet and trying to wee and I'd release my bladder and then something would hit my pelvis and make this sound. And I was like, that doesn't sound very good. But I didn't know what it was. And it kind of didn't even occur to me that he would be back to front. But I think it was his head because he came out with a big dent in his forehead. So, yeah, I think he must have been trying to get through. So anyway, that whole active labour was a wild ride. Like we were in the toilet, in the shower, in the bath, up and down. Like I was lunging. I had one leg over the bath at one point. Like it's like a big birth pool. But I was like, I danced that baby out. Like I've never moved like that in my life. And I remember thinking this is the only thing I know how to do to get him out. And it's funny because I've had friends go to hospitals and be told they have to lie down on their back or they have to be on their hands and knees. And I'm like, I would have been screwed if someone had been telling me how to position myself because there was no right way. Like I just had to constantly be like shifting and maneuvering. And yeah, it was a really challenging physically. Like I remember feeling like my thighs were burning and I was like trying to work out how to get this baby to move. And yeah, it was really, you know, now I look back again and I think I was in like a lot of a story around like how, you know, I have to move the baby instead of actually like letting the baby move, which, you know, anyway, things you learn afterwards. But I think my favorite place was like we had just renovated our beautiful bathroom and I was like, that's where I'm going to like go if I need to be in the shower and the toilet or whatever. And I remember being like, I want to be in our like shed toilet, which is like really narrow so that I could push my arms against it and like squat over the toilet and like push because that was one of the only places I felt like I could really get a bearing on this baby's head. Anyway, so Mace kept having to take me there and then I'd hate it and I'd want to go back to the pool. And he's like, I'm chasing you around. You've got this head between your legs, like, water. He's like trying to catch me and I keep changing my mind. Anyway, he was amazing. He's like, whatever you want to do. Like, yep. And then at one point I was like, I'm just going to stay here and have the baby. And he was like, okay. And then, yeah, I remember looking at him. The only time anything came up was when there was something that happened in Aya's birth where the midwife suggested my cervix might not be open, which is why she wanted to look inside of me. And I remember saying to him, what if my cervix doesn't open? And he was like, do you really think that's a reality? And I was like, no. And he was like, okay. So we just keep going. I'm like, okay. And so that was the only time I remember feeling any doubt. But I will say I was really relieved when I felt the sac like come through my body, like when I could feel through the cervix, this like bulge of membranes. I was like, okay, that's good. Because yeah, I think when there's no measuring and it's just you're sort of like, oh, am I doing it right? But yeah, and I just remember once I felt that membrane, I think I switched into that gear of like the baby will birth itself now, like, and it was less effortful. Like it was still effort, but yeah, it was way more in flow with the whole thing. And that all I remember was Mason saying we need to go and wake Aya up because she wanted to be there for the birth. And I was like, yeah, like it's now. Again, I don't know how I knew that, but it just felt like that. And so he ran out and got her and brought her back in to watch like that part. And I just remember her sitting as far away from me as she could. She was like, not going over there. And yeah, she was kind of like spun out by that. And, you know, she's been woken up. It's like 4 a.m. She's like, my mum's, you know, making noises and growling. And I thought I was shouting, but I wasn't. Apparently I was like, you know, like that really deep. But I felt like I was screaming. But no, apparently not. And she said that I sounded like a lion or something. So she was a bit scared. And yeah, so then he came out. And so this is so funny because I was quite tired and I said to Mace, like, you go behind me and I'll squat and you catch him. I didn't know it was him, but, you know, you catch the baby. So Mace got in the pool with me and I turned around and I remember so with Aya, I'd had a tiny little tear, which I was super worried about before, but once it happened, I was like, oh, it's not even a big deal. But I really wanted to go slowly for the birthing of him. So I held him there and kind of let everything open and then I let him out. And my husband caught him and there was a lot of splashing and like noise and like a bit of like swearing and I was like, oh. I turned around and Mace is like, yeah, the cord around his neck and he was back to I don't think he told me he was back to front at that point, but he's like, the cord around his neck and he's gone blah, 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 blah. He's come out and like unwound and he was like, it was really slippery and I had to catch him and anyway, and I was like, oh my God, is he all right? And anyway, and I was like, it's a boy or a girl, 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 it's a boy. I'm like, I don't know, it's a boy or a girl. I'm like, oh my God, hold on a second, it's a boy or a girl. I'm like, oh. So we sort of check, it's a boy, okay. Oh, what's he doing? Oh, shh, just calm down. Okay, and I'm like, and I'm looking at this thing and he's like really floppy and blue and he's, it just didn't look, like again, I looked perfect and like awake and present and he was not, he was asleep, which I don't know. Like I tried to Google sleeping babies and it comes up with stillbirth. Which, so I don't know if this is even a thing. I've been told like verbally by some midwives that it is a thing that some babies are born sleeping, but I don't know. He was completely asleep, not breathing, just there. And we were both like, oh. And I just remember sitting there with Mace. And so I'm at this stage, I'm still in the pool. I've got membranes because his membranes just burst as he emerged. Membranes hanging out of me. He had a really short cord, so I'm holding him quite close and he's completely floppy and I is still yelling stuff. And Mace is trying to pick the membranes out of my like crutch. And I'm like, stop that. And then I'm just going to get out of the pool. So I'm like stepping out of the pool and I'm still holding him. And I was sort of like, I felt really calm. I didn't feel really worried, but I was a little bit like, oh, you know, is he going to like go pink and like what's happening? Is he going to breathe? And yeah, he just kind of kept lying there and I was like looking in his nose, trying to see if he had anything in there and I couldn't, there was like nothing sort of seemed to be going on. So I don't know, we just kind of sat there and it's hard to, like it felt like forever in my time there, but it probably wasn't very long. We do have a video that I've never watched, not because I don't want to, just because I've never had the time, feels like. But yeah, I started to like just rub him and like talk to him and I was like, you know, kind of kissing him and he did a massive poo in my hand and then like took a breath and then I was like, oh, okay, well, he's alive. And then, so I'm sitting there covered in meconium, holding this like baby and he's started to breathe, but his breath was a little bit funny and I was like, oh, okay. And not sure. And I had gone straight on the boobs. So I was kind of thinking like maybe to put him on the boobs, I'm putting him there and he didn't really want that. So, and then he started to breathe a bit more like normally and sort of started to pink up and stuff. And I thought, okay, he seems all right. He had a massive dent though in his forehead. So I was like, oh God, I hope his little head's all right. So we just moved over to the bed and I birthed Aya's placenta lying down. So I knew I would probably do the same with Leo if I could. So I lay down with that sort of pad thing on the bed just to catch the blood and we just was like holding him and he didn't want to feed. So I ended up leaving him. So I waited for the placenta to birth, which was really quick. I feel like both of mine were under maybe 20 minutes, really fast. And then he still didn't want to feed. So we left the placenta attached to him and I went and washed because I was just covered in meconium and blood and like stuff. So I went and actually had a shower straight away at that time, which I didn't with Aya. I stayed with her for a lot longer. But my husband had him like on his chest and Mace was so stoked because he was like, I got those like first cuddles. Like it was just, I was like, oh, and he still talks about it all the time. He's like, yeah, like Leo just lay on my chest. I was like, yeah, you're his dad. But yeah, it was super cute. So I came out and Mace has got like the placenta next to him in a bowl and this little like baby on him and he's like all snuggled up and so it was dawn. It was just so beautiful because like I'd always wanted to have a night labour and then like a dawn, you know, and it was just like the sun was coming in and I wanted to go and tell everybody on the street. And I was like, it's like 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. Let's just wait. And and then he finally did wake up properly and he had some milk and yeah, from there we were like super relaxed. His dent started going away and I was like, he's going to be okay. But I did end up taking him to osteo or cranio osteo quite a few times and he had compressed ribs, especially around his stomach area, and he had a really big dent in his head, which the cranio osteo worked out we did a few sessions quite close together. And Leo had like colic, what the internet told me was colic anyway. So we never saw anyone except for the cranio osteo for it. But as in he would like drink to sort of, I guess, his capacity and then he would vomit or he'd get really bad gas and these kinds of things. And my instinct was just like he just had, because of his positioning, he was getting smushed, you know, and like all of his, you know, architecture was getting pushed together. And I've studied fascia and stuff. So I was like, I feel like he's got some fascial stuff going on. And he had this tiny little like dent just above his ribs on his stomach side. And so I was like, it was just my instinct. So anyway, we started doing that and that worked, like that stopped. But it took a few sessions to get there. So if anyone's listening and your baby's exhibiting colic, which is such a mysterious thing, and like I don't know, I was like looking at what they said on the internet for it, and it's like, you know, baby drops and like herbs and all these.
I think colic is now just like your child can be diagnosed with colic for crying. If your baby cries,
any crying,
yeah, just like it, like just more crying than what you would deem usual. It's colic now, so yeah, it's I don't know, but
well, like I just, you know, to me, like you're going through this extreme and beautiful process of being born, like your physiology is being affected by the shape of the birth canal, and you know, I was doing a lot of crazy moves, so maybe he was getting like moved around a lot, and I'm just like, yeah, like I feel like that makes a lot of sense to me that he would need maybe some structural support. And we got Aya that as well, even though she wasn't, you know, there's nothing wrong per se. And even with her, like I still remember, and I actually have had it as an adult and like had stuff from my birth like be unwound, that, you know, I had some stuff going on with my jaw and that was all to do with like how I'd been born. So, you know, I just think like, why wouldn't we give our kids these treatments and like support them? And again, like we had the resources this time to come regularly. I only had it a couple of times, I remember. But yeah, and then postpartum with Leo was really, again, quite easy. Like it was winter, so I was so in the confinement vibe. Like I just was so happy to stay home. I ate heaps of mushy, warm, delicious things and did a lot of like steaming, which I'd done with Aya as well, like yoni steams. A lot of hot like sitz baths, or not sitz baths so much, but like this is something I learned from Chinese medicine, where you do the hot water up to your navel depth and you sit in it till you break a sweat on your forehead and then you come out. So it's going to take about 20 minutes to break, but it's like just builds all the yang back into these lower parts of the body. And if you have like uterine issues and stuff, it can really help. Like even if you like have menstrual issues and stuff. Didn't really have any heavy bleeding or anything. Like I just bled as much as I think I bled with Aya. So, and we did the placenta again. So a lot of the postpartum care was very similar in terms of like the energetic stuff I did and the yogic practices, which again, I'm very gentle when I'm postpartum. Like I'm not doing any standing poses and it's all like on the floor, like mostly sort of yin style, but not holding them as long. Breathing exercises, again, very gentle ones. So yeah, it just felt like really resourced. And the biggest thing was probably time, just having another kid, like with, you know, wanting to spend time with Aya, and she adjusted really well, which was great, to having a little brother. But I was super conscious that not all kids do, so that can be really challenging for mums. But yeah, I felt like there was such an easy transition, and he just felt like such a part of our family. But yeah, I felt like our, you know, even co-sleeping with him is so different. Like Aya was like, we slept with her till she was 3. Like it was so nice, and she she only left because she wanted to. We were like, no. Whereas with Leo, it's not been as like smooth and amazing. Like he's not, I don't know, he's way more like he'll feed 20 times a night if my boobs are near him, but he won't if I'm not there. So my husband tends to co-sleep with him. And he's just more, like he's more of a boy. He like headbutts me and he bites me and he's like.
Oh, don't they throw their bodies around so much more? Like my girls are just so careful with the way they place their bodies, but my boys would just like smash you in the face with their head and be like, oh, sorry.
Yeah, like, not even sorry. It's like, keep going. I've just found it really different with him. Like we're still.
Have you found that connection that you had with Aya? Have you found it since having Leo?
Yeah, I feel like he and I have like an easy. He's such an interesting boy because we're in human design, we're the same. Whereas Aya's a projector, so I'm a manifesting generator. So he and my energy match really well. Whereas Aya's and mine actually don't. Like we kind of, like obviously trigger each other because we're mother and daughter. But like there's a lot of. Like even just what she needs versus what I need are really different in terms of our energetics, whereas Leo and I are very similar and he's got a really easygoing personality. Like he's the cruisiest.
I can attest to that.
Yeah, like he's just such a chiller and he's so, like he's just really goes with the flow. Like he's quite stubborn and like if he wants something he'll, especially now he's just, 1.5-ish. So he's going through the learning to say no and stuff. But in general, he's very easy. So I actually feel like he and I have more of an ease about our relationship that's less complicated, I think, which I'm really enjoying. And I just love him in this really different way, which like I love them both in a like I'm gonna die way, but it's just this really soft. He's like a soft masculine energy, whereas my daughter's full of fire. Like he's actually more fire as well, which is weird. But she's just a really fiery, strong, and also shy and has all these like interesting kind of like dynamics to her, where she changes all the time. He's very steady. So, and he did this like 12-month shamanic womancraft course with me from 6 weeks of age. Like so that's what I was gonna say. My postpartum was all like confinement. Womencraft course, it was pretty nuts. But like he held 60 women, like he was in this circle with 60 women going through process and going through their stories and like hearing stories and hearing birth stories and hearing, and I just think like, and he has catalyzed in me like the biggest self-awareness and the biggest like, I feel like I've changed so much in the last like 12 months, which I'm like, I really think, there's something about his energy and I almost think that that lack of connection was almost, I had to trust more than with Aya. Like with Aya, it was easy. Like as in, I didn't really need to work on having the faith in the process because it was so present for me. I was like, how could you ever not, feel your baby and know this? Whereas with him, it was like, you have to trust yourself in a way that, and that's what Jane says a lot. She's like, the birth you have with the child is the way you're going to need to raise that kid. And like, I have a feeling that he's going to challenge me in really big ways, but I'm also going to, that inner trust and like not needing that feedback from the outside and not needing that sort of validation and that sort of magical experience, just being like, no, these are the, this is it. And you know what to do. And you've got this as a mother. Like that's what I feel he's given me.
It's so amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool. We're going to wrap up there.
Okay.
I feel like we could just keep going.
Sorry.
That's all right. We could keep going, but I think still there's so much valuable information in there for everyone. I think birth stories are very, very, very valuable, and I'll say it every time we have people on for birth stories. So thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. It feels crazy just to sit here and talk about my children. But
but it's so good and it's so necessary. I think you could, like, whether you are going to have babies, having babies, done having babies, it's still so valuable because forever people will be having babies. It's information that you can take into the world, and it's information that we've not got, like, not been given growing up. So to get more and more information about trust in the body and in natural processes, and it's
and just
invaluable.
like, even if you go and build a creative project, like you're probably going to see the patterns playing out that you would bring to birth, or you would bring like to any other sort of big experience or initiation. So I think it's so helpful to hear like how other people navigated. And I chose free birth through experiencing, you know, friends and people I don't know sharing their stories and just that sort of reframe of like, oh, it's possible for other people. Why wouldn't it be possible for me? You know, I think that's a really powerful thing. So yeah, and we are very dependent on a lot of external sort of systems, and it's like, to me it's always about like choice, like do I want to engage with that system or not, and yeah, having that sort of capacity to, I just think it comes down to choice. Like if you feel like it's not a medical event, then don't go and be in a hospital. Like
Agreed.
Yeah. But anyway.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thanks
Tahnee,
for having me.
And we'll have you in again. 100%. Everyone, just so you know.
Monthly subscription. Me, you, Tahnee.
We'll call it the Tahnee series.
Yeah. That's a bit odd.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.